Right, so let us start with Murray's contribution to Pangaea and Triassic Park. So I've put here a place that you all should visit, and that is the Elgin Museum. This is the center for Elgin reptiles. It's an incredible facility, and this is really the place that you should go to if you are interested in Scotland in the Triassic. Start here and then work your way around the area. I've also included in here a little critter in the middle, looking forward. So this is in anticipation. This is Matt Humpage's reconstruction of one of the animals, which we will see in a little bit's time. And of course, since I'm at National Museum Scotland, I've included an image of the museum too. Having trouble moving on. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to be a little bit different, I think, in my approach. I think some of you will, and maybe all of you, will know more about the history of the Elgin reptiles than I do. So I am briefly just going to go over some various aspects of it, but I'm going to take a personal approach to it. So these rocks in both these images are sandstones surrounding the area. And for well over 200 years, they've been used for building stone. When fossils were first discovered in them, they were considered to be fishes, and that included also the first reptile remains. Louis Agassiz thought that these remains of reptiles were in actual fact fish scales. But that's by the by almost. We now know that we are dealing with Triassic or late Triassic sequences and also Permian sequences. So I've got a couple of images here, one of a Permian site, Clashach, and then also Triassic sandstones on the left there. Let's deal with the Permian fairly quickly because I'm a Triassic specialist, but it's important. These are just some representatives. And in the top left, and I hope you can see my cursor here, this is a thing called Geekea. It's a dicynodont. It's a mammal-like reptile. And here's the eye, and here's the nostril, and it's got these two sort of fangs either side, tusks either side. So these are the dicynodonts. Now, dicynodonts I will revisit a couple of times in this talk. It looks like it's sort of run into the back of a bus. So this is the front end of its snout, and it's really got squashed. And Elginia on the bottom here is a parasaur. At places like Clashach, there's a fantastic array still being exposed of trackways. And so they deserve an awful lot more attention. I encourage people to continue to be looking in some of these quarries. These are not done and dusted remains, done and dusted fossils. There's a lot to be done, as you'll see as we go on through the talk. So that's my quick nod to the Permian. Permian extinction wiped out things like Geekea. It wiped out Elginia. And a whole array, the diversity of life plummeted. And we were left with a very depauperate fauna of things like this guy, Listosaurus, another dicynodont. So here's the orbit, the eye, here's the same, this is a fossil here on the left. The two tusks, you can see either side, dicynodont. The other side obviously not showing there. And this obviously ran into an even bigger bust than Geekea. Listosaurus is found Antarctica, India, parts of South Africa, Russia. It's a very widespread form, but we do not get a whole diversity of dicynodonts immediately after the Permian extinction. I have introduced another one, another dicynodont here, Placerius or Placerius, depending on how you want to pronounce it, from the American Southwest. This is an upper Triassic form. Somewhat different, obviously didn't meet the same buses as Listosaurus and Geekea, but an interesting animal nonetheless. Now, I've used these two as the sort of brackets. An awful lot happened between Listosaurus and Placerius, and what I want to do is just touch on a few select areas of the Triassic to try and illustrate a few things. And let's start, as we should start, with Elgin and the Lossiemouth sandstone. Now, the fossils in there are really quite remarkable for their unusual preservation, shall we say. They are not easy to interpret at all. So what we have, for the most part, are at the top, you can see, a natural mold in the rock. And it is almost impossible. Here we have basically a vertebral column running along there. But the bone is missing. So you've got these cavities within the rock. So how do you interpret them? Well, with difficulty. Making a cast of it, though, is one of the ways which I shall come on to. But that wasn't what the earlier workers tended to do. This is an animal which I think is one of the most important from the algae reptiles. This is a thing called Scleromochlus, first described by Woodward in 1907. And that's his reconstruction on the left. And you can see the type of fossil here in the middle. It is not something that you would travel, I wouldn't have thought, thousands of miles to see. However, some people have done so because it is a critical fossil. But these are the sorts of drawings pretty well of the original material that they produced. And up on the top is von Hune's reconstruction of this little animal. And you can see that they're both showing it as this sort of almost frog-like animal, jumper. And they envisaged this as jumping along in these sand dunes that was thought to prevail in Triassic times in the area. Now, an awful lot more can be done with these. What is this? Maybe a scale of some sort there. What is in this hole here? And in the 60s, 1960s, Alec Walker, and this is Alec Walker's writing here that you'll see, these are his labels. Alec Walker experimented with all sorts of techniques to cast these specimens and get more information from them. And as you can see here on the bottom, he used a molding vinyl gel, different resins he used, and just to see what he could come up with. And you'll also see, before removing bone, he was not averse to dissolving the bone out so that he could then get a much more complete cast. And so that was one of the classic techniques that he employed. And this is the sort of mold that he was able to produce. And this is Scleromochlus again, but you can see a lot easier than I suspect Woodward and von Hune could of the bones and the structure of the skeleton of this animal. And it was these sorts of casts that Mike Benton used to, in 1999, create a much more sophisticated looking animal. So this is Scleromochlus as according to Mike Benton in 1999. And, he's showing it as a very highly cursorial animal. Let's not forget the other players. I'll come back to Scleromochlus, but I just wanted to fill you in a little bit more. So other things that are found in the Lossiemouth sandstones, the Triassic sequences of the algan reptiles, is this thing Hyperodapedon, a rhynchosaur. This is a sort of barrel-chested animal You can see from on top here, so looking down on the back of it, you can see how rounded it is. This was a herbivore, sort of fermentation type gut in here that it held. Has this beak for chopping off bits of leaf and the like. So this is one of the key reptiles. Also procolophonids. So procolophonids, like Listosaurus, they survived the end Permian extinction. And this animal on the right, the skull here, little skull with the eye socket in this region here, is Procolophon itself. And again, like Listosaurus, very widespread. Found in Antarctica, found in South Africa, found in China, found in Russia. So a very widespread animal. Procolophonids by the end of the Triassic were a bit weirder though. So on the right is a thing called Hypsognathus from the east coast of North America, up in the Newark supergroup. And on the left, this is Leptopleuron. Leptopleuron is another of the Elgin reptiles, described mostly by Laura Seiler on the basis of casts, quite a lot of casts, similar to the ones that I showed you earlier about with Scleromochlus. So really quite cute little animals with these spikes out of their cheeks. Then we come to a living group. This is Sphenodon, this is the skull, and here's Sphenodon punctatus, the living Tuatara. So it lives on a few isolated islands off New Zealand today, but it has a history going back to the Triassic. And this is the reconstruction of Mike Benton and myself that we put together based on molds that we took from various specimens from the Elgin reptiles. And this is Brachyrhinodon as we saw it quite a few years ago, shall we say. So that's Brachyrhinodon. Not all of the reptiles are represented by casts. Some of them, there is actually good bone, as you can see here. So here is the side view of a thing called Staganolepis, which I showed you casts of earlier. And this is in looking up into the roof of the mouth. So we have the one line of teeth coming, oh, sorry about that. One line of teeth coming down here, another line there, and then you can see some more teeth in there. So we are looking up into the roof of the mouth. And then on the other side is the roof of the skull. So we're looking at the bones between the two eye sockets and the back of the skull there. And if you put it all together, you can see how in Alec Walker's reconstructions of this animal, here's top view, side view, a different side view. And in ventral view, looking up into the palate, you can see how that is easy to reconstruct. So a lot easier than playing around with these casts. But casts are what we have, and this is actually, these are the osteoderms of Staganolepis, and these are the things that Agassiz referred to as a fish, hence the name lepis at the end of stagon, because he considered it a fish. And they belong to a variety. Staganolepis is a huge diversity of different forms of things called aetosaurs. And they are common throughout India, North and South America, parts of Europe too. And you have all sorts of different forms. Some of them grew up to about 10 meters in size. And some of them had these big spikes on them, a bit stegosaur-like, if you will. So there's things like Desmatasuchus, Palatipothorax, Tipothorax, and they were all herbivores, sort of snuffling and rooting around in the ground for roots and the like, is what we envisaged them having done. And moving a little bit further away from Elgin, we see this beautiful slab of things called Aetosaurus. This is a block that's in the Stuttgart Museum of Natural History. and beautiful little guys. You can see a skull here. Here's the eye socket, and here's the snout. This one, little one looking up, and here's another one. The skull, back of the body, down to the tail, the legs coming out. And this is what my colleague Doug Henderson, how he portrayed this. And so he started to see these animals in a very different light. He still went back a little bit to Elgin. And so here's his portrayal of Scleromochlus jumping over Erpetosuchus. But you can see where he got the idea from. So he started when he was looking at the Elgin reptiles, straying away from Elgin. And who can blame him? So this is another Aeitosaur, a thing called Coahomosuchus. And this is a specimen, beautiful specimen. This is top and bottom of the same block. So here we are looking at the belly, and here's the back of the animal with this armor covering the whole thing, and there's a skull here. A lot easier to work with than those little cavities in the sandstone in Elgin. And before you know what's happened, we're sort of dazzled by a whole array of forms being found around the world. So animals with unimaginable anatomies, things like this thing, Atopodentatus, hammerhead mouth. What on earth was it doing? Chalicopteryx here, it's got a gliding membrane between its back legs. So people started to, myself included, started to move away from some of the Elgin reptiles. They were too difficult almost to work with. And I'm just going to concentrate for the next little bit on what lured me for a bit away from Elgin. And these are the Fisherfills in Britain. So this is a place called Cromwell Quarry in England, southwest England, Avon. And Titherington Quarry with my colleague Dave Whiteside in front of one of these Fisherfills. And they're basically carboniferous limestone with slumps of sediment, Triassic sediment within them. So they're sort of cave and Fisherfills. And in these cave and Fisherfills are sometimes exquisite skeletons. So this is a rhynchocephalian, a sphenodontian, just like Brachyrhinodon is. But hey, was that so much easier to work with than Brachyrhinodon? Of course it was. And it was a lot easier for me to put together this restoration of Planecephalosauros, a new form at the time, than it was for me to put together that reconstruction of Brachyrhinodon. Another one at the bottom here is a thing called Diffidontosaurus, which Dave Whiteside described very thoroughly. Another form, still from the Fisherfills, Clevosaurus. And, you know, just look at this pristine skull. So this is, we've lost the front end of the snout, but it was very easy for me to make this reconstruction of this animal based on what I can see of the skull. You can see the upper jaw here. You can see where the skull articulates in the lower jaw like that. So easy to work with. And with this articulation here between the ankle with the foot, you know, you can't go wrong. Beautiful, beautiful material. Moreover, sometimes you get disassociated material. So this is, you have to remember that this is 200 odd million years old, but it could have been a bone that's come from an owl pellet almost. Exquisite preservation. You can see, so this is, I'm on the inside of the skull looking out. So this is the bottom edge of the orbit. So this is where the eye would have been. And the palate would have joined on here. And you can see the edges along here of the articulation facets for each individual bone. It's just beautiful preservation. So this is the thing, this is actually Planecephalosauros. This is a thing called Sigmala, another rhynchocephalian, and Clevosaurus itself here. So absolutely exquisite preservation. And of course they produce procolophonids too. So this is, I think this was probably just came out last week or maybe the week before. Now, you try saying that, witcher worm, So that is the pronunciation, I think that's the pronunciation of this procolophonid. This is from the Fisher-Fills, but it's a very close relative of Leptopleuron from Elgin. But I have to say, a lot easier to describe. And if we carry on with the Fisher-Fills, we have crocodilians there. So these teeth here, on these 4 teeth on the right, are all from this crocodile. Not your typical poolside couch potato. This was a very active cursorial animal, but nevertheless, it was one of the first true crocodiles to have walked the planet. This isolated tooth on the left is actually from a dinosauromorph, so a sort of very basal animal leading on to the dinosaurs, so one of the first dinosauromorphs. And you've possibly recognized this. Very similar to Staganolepis. This is probably actually Aetosaurus, but this is from the Fisher-Fills. So what the Fisher-Fills and some of the other areas were starting to tell us was we have the first crocodiles, we have the first rhynchocephalians. Other places we have the first lissamphibians, so frogs, salamanders. We also have the first mammals, 2 turtles, dinosaurs. They are from the Triassic. And dinosaurs live today in the form of birds. So I consider these to be modern animals. And I've surrounded this with a few other things, just to remind us that invertebrates, and particularly insects, are the little things that make the world go round. And the origins of the modern day ecosystem arose in the Triassic. These are from a different site, the insects. This is a rove beetle, 30,000 living taxa today. These are the first true flies that are the dipterans, and some of these represent living families. That little pest that you have, Thyssenopterans, thrips, they all arose in the Triassic. And over the last 20 years or so, looking around different parts of the world, other than Elgin, we have started to see that as well as being a real Heath Robinson world of weird and wonderful things like Atopa dentatus, like Chalavipteryx, it was also the birth of the modern world. So it is a sort of mixture of the ancient and modern. And that leads me on to a little discussion about modern techniques. And this is a CT scanner, as it was at Penn State in 2004, 2005. And what there was a sort of revolution, I guess, in the early 2000s of how we approached looking at fossils. So this is a setup, and there's a fossil here in the middle, sitting down here. And this is a setup in a room, but it's a lead-lined room, so it's an open room. It's not. It's very difficult to work with. So you have to be working outside the room and doing the manipulation of the specimen and things like that from outside the room. But this was the sort of start of this. And I envisaged that over the next, certainly 10 years, I would expect that unless you are using a cabinet type CT scanner, this is going to become the sort of regular way of looking at fossils, because they have done away with having to look and prepare these exquisite fossils and be able to look inside very, very easily. Now, the sorts of scans that you get from this, they do take a lot of working through, because you get these sort of stacks that you have to then segment out and get and differentiate the fossil from the surrounding matrix. but it is an easy way of getting into the inside of rocks. And so all those specimens which I showed you of things like Atopodentatus, of Clevosaurus from the Fisher Fills, it would be so much easier and so much more informative, often anyway, to do a CT scan of it. So what are we doing now? We are doing this, we are using these techniques for examining. We've come back, full circle, back to the Elgin reptiles. So I've got a whole series of images here, as you can see on the bottom left, from Davide Foffa's work. So Davide Foffa and colleagues have done an awful lot more work recently because of the introduction and development of CT scanning techniques. And this is just Scleromoculus. So this is all that he has so far really looked at. He's done a little bit of work on Erpetosuchus and a little bit of work on some blocks of small blocks of Elgin sandstone that have got cavities in them, and he's realized that there's other animals in there too. So the thing that I want to really highlight here is the beautiful restoration by Matt here from Davide's work compared to Mike Benton's restoration of Scleromoculus. And I think this technique I think is a good way of calling it the Heineken technique. So CT scanning reaches the parts that other techniques cannot reach. And that's exactly what happened. So when you make casts of these things, you only get in so far into the cavities. You do not extend right into them. And so the easiest way of showing you this is look at the length of tail that Davide has managed to realize is in some of these blocks compared to what Mike Benton did. And there's an awful lot more detail now coming out of these Elgin reptiles. So this is just Scleromoculus. So there's Leptopleurodon to look at. There's Brachyrhinodon, my favorite to look at. There's Stagnalepis, there's Ornithosuchus. They are all there and all require this type of technique. Because what Davide has done is shown that Scleromoculus is actually one of the most critical fossils for our understanding of the origin of pterosaurs. So this now, Scleromoculus, is, I think, much more widely accepted as being one of the sort of key fossils in the origination or understanding of the origination and evolution of pterosaurs. It's what we call a pterosauромorph. So this is a fantastic work. And so from things like that squished, vague cast on the left, we are able now, yes, the colors, we cannot get the colors out of the fossils. That's is still guesswork. However, we are able to show the Elgin reptiles in much more, I think, detail, a better understanding of them. And so I think coming up over the next few years, Davide certainly will be investigating more. And so revisiting the Elgin reptiles is going to put a whole new light on discoveries such as the ones from the Fisher Fills, such as the ones from Germany, the Aetosaurus, those sorts of things. And I think from being a sort of shining light for, what, 120 years ago, the Elgin reptiles sort of fading, they are now going to come back. And what I should also say to you is that it's very important not only to be looking in the museums, but also all those exposures. All those exposures are out there. There's no difference between the quarry as it is today than it was, say, in Woodward's time. So the real cry here, the battle cry, is go out into the field, start looking at the Triassic sediments, because the fossils often occur in pockets. And where there's activity, where there's quarrying activity, if you can get access, talking to the quarry owners, always ask for permission, make sure you do that. I think, I still believe that there's an awful lot more to come from the Elgin reptiles. And I think there's also an awful lot more potentially to come from elsewhere in Scotland. There are other Triassic sediments outcropping in different parts of Scotland. And I think the issue is we have not been looking. We've been sidetracked by Atopidentartus. We've been sidetracked by maybe Diffidontosaurus, by some of the Aetosaurs like Coahomasuchus, these beautiful, exquisite fossils, when in actual fact, back at home, there's probably more to be explored. So I'm leaving you with that picture there on the right of the quarry. We have visited there a few times, but it needs some constant work there. And I just obviously want to thank an awful number of colleagues. So colleagues, particularly at Elgin Museum, Janet, Alison, Dave, and so on. Colleagues at National Museum Scotland, such as Stig, Elsa Panzeroli, Doug Henderson. A lot of the artwork which I use here. Exquisite artist, and I suppose I misled him in sort of moving away from Elgin, but hopefully he'll come back to it. Matt Selesky, Matt Humpage, who does that fantastic work there, and then other colleagues like David A., Mike Benton, and Dave Whiteside. And I especially want to acknowledge the inspiration of Alec Walker, because he saw a long time ago the real value of just meticulously looking for different ways of making casts of this material. And he has really revolutionized the way we work on the Triassic, in the same way that CT scanning is also revolutionizing it. So thank you very much for your attention, and I am happy to try and answer questions.